you still in a position where you'd like me to run for you?
Yes, thank you so much, Fred.
Okay, you got it. Margaret, thanks for the cheat sheet. It's very helpful. Carolyn, are we ready to start?
You are ready to start.
All right. I know we were talking about people having different names. I realize I'm named Carolyn Schaefer on the screen, which is totally fine with me, but it might be confusing to others.
I'll fix that.
No problem. So it is 1 o'clock, and I am calling to order the January 19th, 2021 meeting of the Albemarle County Architectural Review Board. This meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with ordinance number 20A16, an ordinance to ensure the continuity of government during the COVID-19 disaster. It appears that a quorum is present. Members present electronically are Dade Vanderwerf, Frank Stoner, Fred Missel, Frank Hancock, and Chris Henningsen. Opportunities for public access to this meeting are posted on the county's website at the county calendar. The public has real-time audio-visual access to this meeting over Zoom and real-time audio access over the telephone, both as provided in the lawfully posted meeting notice. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the county's website. The county online meeting, or this online meeting, and any associated chats are public record and are subject to disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act. Today we have a number of applicants and project representatives attending. Carolyn Schaefer, our recording secretary, may need to contact you during this meeting, so please check the chat box and respond as necessary. When it's your turn to speak, speakers, please first state your name for the record. Everyone is participating today. It's good practice to mute your microphone until you're asked to speak. Applicants who are making presentations, note that your presentation is limited to a total of 15 minutes, which you can divide among your team members. Carolyn will let us know when the 15-minute clock is up. So with that, are there any disclosures?
Yes, I have a disclosure. I will need to recuse myself from ARB-2020-128 Ivy Proper. My firm is working on this project.
All right, thank you.
Okay, what I'm going to do is when we start to try again. I am going to move Frank Hancock to attendee until this matter is over. You can hear it, but you won't be, you'll just be an attendee kind of watching. When this is all over, I'll move you back over to a panelist.
Thank you, Carolyn.
You're welcome.
You will be missed, Frank. All right, any other disclosures? Okay, seeing none. We have 2 regular review items scheduled for today. Chris Taggart and Margaret Malashevsky from the Planning Division of Community Development will be presenting on these items today. Our first regular review item is ARB 2020-18 Ivy Proper. Chris, do you want to go ahead with your presentation?
Sure, thanks, Fred.
Thank you.
Are you all viewing the correct screen?
No, we're seeing your notes.
Okay. Let's see. How about now?
Perfect.
All right. The application I'm presenting on is preliminary review of architecture. The proposal is for a 6,500 square foot office building and associated site improvements. The site is comprised of 2 vacant parcels on the north side, Route 250, across from the Route 250 and Ivy Depot Road intersection. ARB recommended approval while conditions of the initial site plan on November 16, 2020. While the design of the proposed building overall has a contemporary appearance, the historic architecture of the area is reflected through the use of simple forms, symmetrical distribution of parts, gable roofs, and entrances topped with canopies. The proposed materials are either ones that were used historically or ones that resemble those that were. Although the rear of the building faces the entrance corridor, the changes in form and scale, in addition to the windows and doors along the elevation, engage the frontage and establish an appropriate appearance. However, there are a few items of potential concern. The building design features window groupings that have a non-traditional appearance. The proposed color for most of the exterior is Arctic white, which will stand out in the immediate surroundings. And the gables, which traditionally have windows or architectural detailing, appear somewhat blank without these elements. Staff is recommending that versions of the perspective renderings without street trees be provided to allow for a clear view of the proposal. The Arctic white building color be revised to a more muted earth tone color. Notations added to the line drawings to clarify the distribution of windows and other materials, and considering adding elements in the gable ends of the building. Staff recommends the changes that were listed in the staff report to be addressed with the final site plan submittal. I'd be happy to answer any questions you all may have.
Great, thank you, Chris. Frank, Stoner, any questions? You're muted.
Frank.
Just had a question about the areas kind of between the buildings, those connector pieces. Did you get any more detail as to what those are structurally? Is that a flat roof? Is it just a wall and a, like what's behind those? Is it?
It didn't note in the drawings. I believe it's a flat roof with either the Hardy Pound or the Nietzsche panels veneer clad over it. But the applicant probably should be able to better answer that question.
That's great, thanks.
Chris, any questions?
No, no questions.
All right, awesome. Dade, any questions?
No, none for me. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Chris.
Great, none for me either. Thanks, Chris, appreciate it. Okay, with that, we'll turn it over to the applicant. Do you have a presentation?
We do have a presentation. Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Schaefer. I'm with Design Develop. Evan Phillips is going to be sharing his screen. So if we could make him the presenter, that'd be helpful. I was going to give a brief project introduction, kind of talk through our thought process on this, and then kick it over to Evan to address the individual staff comments. As always, we want to thank county staff for their thorough staff reports, for their guidance through the project. We always appreciate it. We appreciate what you guys do for the county. And thanks to the board. Welcome, Chris. This is the first time I've seen you on the board, so thank you. Thanks everybody for the service. We appreciate it. Is it possible to get Evan's screen up?
Oh, here we go. I can just take it. Didn't realize. Apologies.
Evan, we can see all of your screen.
Which one?
Including the, there you go. Yep. And go ahead and close.
This screen is what you want.
Awesome. Okay, so as county staff has mentioned in their staff report, the parcel is right in the downtown Ivy corridor area. It's an important entrance corridor on 250 for visitors traveling west out of Charlottesville and headed towards Crozet. It's right at the intersection of some pretty important roads for Albemarle County as residents distribute themselves further into the county rural areas. Owensville Road is within a quarter-mile of the parcel, as well as Ivy Depot Road comes out right across from the parcel. Ivy is interesting in that it's the intersection of these important roads, and it's also the intersection of the railroad. So our parcel is immediately adjacent to the railroad and right next to the railroad trestle, which you may be familiar with in this location. It was important for us to kind of take a look at the context in downtown Ivy as you travel along 250 and allow that to influence the design. As staff mentioned, these are traditional gable forms, which are very standard or typical along this part of Albemarle County and this part of the Entrance Corridor Review Board. We are taking this gable form and we are distinguishing it from a residential building by doing a more contemporary design and modern detailing and finishes, as staff has noted, through the window distribution and through some of our detailing at the eaves and things like that. Overall, the material palette is relatively traditional. We've got the gable, the board and batten material on all of the gable forms. There's a standing seam metal roof, and there is a Nichiha panel, which resembles a lap siding you might typically see on a residential project, but elevates that a little bit with a kind of a V-groove look to be more commercial and more professional services, professional offices, which is the intended use of this building. The gable roof form allowed us a lot of flexibility to break down the scale, to break down the mass, and there's 3 separate building forms that turn 90 degrees as we move our way through the site. It allowed us to address the front of the building, which as staff noted, is the entrance corridor, but when we relegate parking to the back, now we have to address both facades. And it gives us the opportunity to create a front entrance from the parking lot for the end user, while still creating a building that's appropriate and well articulated from the entrance corridor side. The gable roof form stepping also helps bring down the scale and mass, as I mentioned. I think this is a C1 zoned parcel, so the height limitation is something like 65 feet. Obviously for a parcel, for this parcel, 65 feet is not practical for a number of reasons, but we did note the low nature of the surrounding buildings, and it became important to emphasize this through a single story building, keeping the scale broken down and keeping the mass relatively low with the single story. I think that was pretty much the introduction that I wanted to cover. The groups read as a unified whole. We've got the groups that break down, the unifying groups that break down 3 times through the gable roof form. To answer Frank's comments, there is a flat roof behind the Nichiha panel clad connectors. The design also allows us flexibility from an end use perspective. We can have an entire tenant take 6,500 square feet, but we could also split the building down the middle because of the symmetrical and have each tenant take 3,000 square feet, or we could even break this into thirds and have a couple of varying spaces. So it provides flexibility while also allowing us to respond to the entrance corridor. This is a preliminary submission for us, so this is the first time seeing it. For you guys, we're really excited to have this project in front of you. We think it's an important project along the Ivy Road corridor. We're really excited about the discussion and hearing your comments and gathering feedback so that we can put our best foot forward on that final submission for you. And with that in mind, I'm going to pass it over to Evan Phillips, who's the project manager with Design Develop, and he's going to go through the specific responses to these staff comments. Evan?
Hi, everyone. Kevin mentioned I'm Evan Phillips. I'm a project manager with Design Develop. Thank you, Kevin, for the introduction. I just want to take it through each of the staff comments that was addressed earlier in the meeting. These staff comments up on screen are comments to which we are amenable and we intend to incorporate into the next submission. So I just want to quickly walk through these, kind of give a brief synopsis of our feelings about them. Comment 1, providing samples. We will most definitely provide samples for all the materials and glass, any glass we pick, any materials, any colors in the next submission. Provide specifications on proposed window glass. Most of the glass, just so you guys know, will not be tinted. We are considering a slight tint on the south side of the building, so facing Ivy, but we make sure that that adheres to the county guidelines, and we will provide specifications for that in the next submission. Comment 7 will add the standard window glass note to the architectural drawings, standard mechanical note in the next comment. And currently we have a landscape architect who is working on a plan, and we will have that ready in the next submission as well. From there, I just want to jump into comments that we kind of created some illustrations to help aid in discussion today. Staff comment 2, provide versions of the perspective renderings without street trees. We understand it's a little bit difficult to see the building and our design intention through those street trees, so we just wanted to provide some renderings for you guys to assist you in discussion or comments you may have on the building itself. Staff comment 3 may be the only one we slightly disagree with staff on. We think that the Arctic white building color is appropriate for ivy. You see it a lot in granted residential buildings, kind of the white farmhouse aesthetic with the standing seam roof and the board and batten siding. We do think it is appropriate, but we would love to hear board's comments as well. Staff comment 4, add notations to the line drawings to clarify the distributions of the windows. We've done that here. We've also included a material key to assist the board and clarify any misunderstandings about which parts of the building are windows, which parts are storefront, the material distribution and all of that. Staff comment 5, at the gable end of the building, it was commented that the gable might be a little bit simple for what the building is. We feel that the board and batten actually provides a lot of interest on the end of the gable, and that it is appropriately detailed. Previously in the submission, we didn't include the seams. You can see here, the hardy panels comes in 10-foot sections, so we'll have to butt joint the ends of the panels together. You can see a flashing detail we intend to incorporate here, which we think adds a little bit of complexity to the facade. Another option is that we could consider adding gable end vent or a window to increase the complexity of the facade. We think it might get a little bit messy, including that with the board and batten. A lot of the times when you see that breaking down like a stucco facade or a stucco gable, which is a lot cleaner and kind of adds some interest, but we might see it get a little bit messy up there on ours. Staff comment 8 is mechanical. So staff just wanted to know where mechanical was located on site. There will be 2 units. We're planning for 2 units currently on the flat portions of the roof behind a 3-foot parapet. So the units being 4 foot tall, would be mostly screened by the parapet. Down on the street, for your information, is about 520 feet, and then slab would be 522, parapet 536. So the top of parapet is about 16 feet up from the corridor, 15 at the lowest, kind of up towards the bridge. So we believe that you won't be able to see the HVAC units from the street. As you can see in these 2 images on the right, they're screened, and I believe that you have to get like 150 feet back to be able to see it, but something to discuss with the board. Staff comments 9, 13, 14, I've kind of grouped together. Revised proposed retaining wall color to a muted color. We're proposing this James River Diamond Pro, as you can see at the bottom. This rendering is kind of a coalition of all of these precedent images. You can see the updated James River. Staff comment 14 is to revise the dumpster enclosure to more closely resemble that retaining wall, play off the retaining wall rather than the building, to kind of help mask that into the site as well. So we're suggesting a cobblestone. And then staff comment 13 was to provide planting at the bottoms of the retaining walls to integrate them into the site. We had intended to, and this wasn't showing in the previous submission, provide hanging ivy of sorts that would kind of creep from the top of the wall down. We believe that this would help integrate into the site. These are some examples of what that might look like. And you can see all of these things in the rendering on the top right. Staff comment 11, provide a lighting plan with the next submittal. This is the lighting plan we currently have, still being tweaked a little bit as site issues arise and such, but we will definitely provide this in the final or next submission. And here are some of the fixtures we were thinking. The doors for the building each would get 2 downlight sconces. There would be bollards strategically placed throughout the planting beds around the building to help light the parking. And then post-top luminaires would be out in the parking itself to help distribute the light more evenly throughout the site. Here are some renderings of what that might look like. Once again, it's kind of preliminary and this doesn't perfectly reflect the plan, but just to give you a sense of where the lights are and what it might look like. And with that, I think I have completed the staff comments and I'd like to hand it back over to Kevin.
Thank you, Evan. I know we're getting close to the end of our 15 minutes here, so I just wanted to briefly touch on preliminary submission. There's always kind of a dance. We never know quite how far to go. We want to put our best foot forward in front of you. So we know we need to come back with the lighting plan and the landscape plan, but wanted to get the proposed building in front of you before we went too far to make sure we were headed down the right path, gather feedback and gather comments. So we're really looking forward to it, and thank you very much.
Great, thank you both. I'll just say that this was a great presentation. I thought the way you addressed staff comments was incredibly helpful. So thank you both for that. I'll turn it over to ARB members to see if they have any questions for the applicant. Mr. Stoner.
Yes, Fred, Kevin, Evan, thank you. That was a really nice proposal. I only had really one question, which is, how are you guys planning on handling runoff from the roof?
Yeah,
Given that they're
great question. The roofs actually filter into the flat area, and you can see in this section. Thank you for bringing this up, Evan. The flat areas of what we call the mechanical roofs, the flat roofs, funnel back down towards the parking lot side, where they'll go underground into our stormwater retention, which is out in the parking lot. And so there's some DIs along that sidewalk there, and our underground retention is actually in the parking lot to the east of the parking lot, to the entrance aisle. Yep.
And then what are you doing off the gable?
So
Systems.
most of the gable gets caught in into the middle, but if they're on the gables that go to the outside, we have basically a 2-foot border of river rock that will act as like a drainage buffer around the slab to help mitigate that into groundwater.
Gotcha. Great, thanks. That's my only question, I think.
Thanks, Frank. Dade, any questions?
Sure. Thank you, Fred. Echo your both of your praises for the presentation. It's nice and clear, and seems like very suitable forms and scale and material. Some settled questions, I guess, in terms of the gable end. Is the gable height such that the seam and the paneling could happen at the bottom of the gable at that datum, or is the gable taller than 10 feet?
Yeah, that's correct. And this is a point of much discussion for us.
Yeah.
It is. As soon as you start to introduce the board and batten, now all of a sudden the question is, where are the horizontal seams? Could we go up one page, Evan, to the flashing details here? These are 10-foot panels is what you're seeing. So our window header right there is at 10 feet. And then we go an additional 10 feet to where that is called out as the butt joints of the hardy panel. And then from there, I think it's an additional 6 feet, 5 feet, something like that. So what we did was we just took our largest available hardy panel, a 4x10 sheet, and we stacked it like that. We were trying to do clever things where we broke at the eave line, but we ended up introducing a 4th panel and it seemed to get that much more complex. But it's a good point, and it's a fair thing to consider.
Okay. And is that there is a flashing at those butt joints that will create a shadow line?
That's correct, and I'm not sure if you can see the screen, but on the right side, it's a Z flashing that's part of that Hardy panel system. It's pretty minor. It's actually quite
that
nice.
is pretty flash.
Yeah,
Okay.
they
And
have a good system. Sorry.
Okay, good. And do the battens break at that line too, or do they cross?
No, they don't have to. They can run past it.
Okay. Okay. So you have continuity at that point. Okay. And then I thought, would it be feasible, the simplicity of the larger central opening in the gables facing the parking lot seems somehow, at least to me, a little more appropriate in terms of sort of agricultural vernacular. Would it be possible to do a similar opening on the side to the south facing the corridor or the gable?
Yeah, a great comment again, and it's the struggle when we start to relegate parking, and we kind of have to consider back of house considerations in terms of professional offices or professional service buildings. Is there a storefront, and then is there a back of house? But we have to address both as front entrances. It's something we looked at and something we'd be happy to consider looking at. It is more a function consideration. How are these, what effectively becomes the rear of the building gets used is it for storage, or is it an emergency egress or an employee only egress kind of thing? But it's a fair point and a fair consideration.
Okay, yeah, well, thank you for that. And then in terms of the color, I don't disagree that there are some white, bright white buildings in the county. Are there any precedents for similar sort of simple elemental form buildings that are in that kind of bright color on this corridor or elsewhere that you've looked at?
Yeah, we tried to drive up and down Google Maps for quite a bit, and we found a lot of residential examples, and we saved those, but then it kind of didn't feel as applicable to include them. I think it's a residential roof form or building form to a certain degree, and we're blending that to be contextual, but then detailing it with modern and contemporary details like the no overhang and the Nichia panels and some of our window sizing and placements and things like that. So there is a direct correlation from a gable form in white cladding. It's just more residentially treated, if that was a long-winded approach to that.
No, I hear that. Yeah, I think having looked at the corridor recently, a couple weeks ago, I feel like these forms to me relate somewhat more to the agricultural buildings that are along the corridor, and for the most part, those are often weathered or painted in recessive colors. So sympathetic to staff's comment, and would appreciate some further consideration of alternates to the white. But those are all my questions. I'm sorry I veered into comments, but thank you again for a nice proposal and presentation.
Great, thanks, Dave. Chris, any questions?
I don't have any questions per se, assuming there's a time to make comments later. I will reiterate, it was very well presented, and but I don't have any questions per se now.
Okay, great, thanks. That's me, I guess. That leaves me. Yeah, again, I appreciate the challenge that you're dealing with the relegated parking, and it's definitely something that we've seen around the county over the years. So yeah, I would just echo Dave's thoughts on that, and appreciate your continuing to look at that. Under the heading of the gable, this may just be personal preference, so I really hesitate to say it, but maybe the thing that's causing it to look sort of, I don't know if the word is, I guess blank we'll use, is it's hard to really understand what you're doing with the soffit and the fascia at the roof, and how the roof is actually meeting that edge. And I think on page 12, where you showed those examples, the upper right showed a pretty distinct overhang, whereas it looks like on the side, the bottom doesn't show that, but on the, I don't know if that's the front or the side, but see, I'm wondering if you've given any thought to how you're going to address the fascia and the soffit and where the roof connects.
Yeah, we have, and I think, Evan, you may be pulling up that detailed precedent. The goal was to try and create a very simple building form, and allow that extruded gable form to read very legibly, and approach it with a contemporary approach and detailing. With that in mind, we aren't showing yet, and you're correct, that we aren't showing that trim. There's going to be some sort of drip edge trim, a metal drip edge trim that hangs down there. But the goal would be to keep that as minimal as possible, allow our standing seam roof to kind of just barely get over our battens, which will also create a shadow line. We're going to have, probably about an inch and a half shadow line where that metal roof extends, kind of what you see on the image on the right here. And then there will be a flashing edge right there. But I think it's relatively subtle, and I think it's helpful to have that building form read so legibly and so cleanly. It really, as a composition, kind of speaks to the rest of the details on the project.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. In terms of color, we've actually been doing a fair amount of board and batten buildings at Boar's Head and Birdwood over the last few years. I don't know if you've seen any of those. The golf practice facility is board and batten, and then some of the more utilitarian buildings, like restrooms on the golf course and then next to the tennis are all board and batten. And we spent a lot of time debating on color and ended up going with a white. So I understand the concern about it being reduced, but I guess you sort of answered. This is not a question. I'm just throwing that out there as potentially something you might want to take a look at if it's helpful along the corridor. And I think that is all I had. So thank you both again, and I will open it up to public comment. Carolyn, has anyone indicated that they would like to make a comment?
No, sir, not at this time.
Okay, great. Well, any more questions? If not, we'll move into discussion.
Fred, can I ask one question I think's been answered, but I'm not sure I heard it. The roof color is dark bronze?
It's either a charcoal gray or a dark bronze. It starts to riff off the storefront frames.
Okay, gotcha. And then the flat roof sections,
most likely
color?
A TPO, a white TPO, just for heat reduction.
But the walls themselves, what color are you kind of envisioning? Again, looks like a dark bronze or something.
Yes, that is the Nichiha product, and I will hold up a sample here. If we want to talk more in depth about Nichiha, it is a fiber cement product. It's 5/8 inch thick. It's got a V groove siding on it. It comes in 18-inch wide panels. And then so one of the V grooves becomes a true V groove lap. And then there's two more that are just surface applied. It's a product that's used a lot commercially because it's super durable. It's very low maintenance. It has a 25-year warranty. It's the rigidity of the 5/8 inch means it doesn't warp or flex or crack or cup and bend, things like that. So we've had good luck with it. And this is in the bark, which is a darker version of the Nichiha architectural wall panel. And here I'm holding up to the screen. I'm not sure how helpful it is, but that's the bark texture. You can see the 5/8 inch thickness fiber cement board.
Gotcha.
And this product on the screen is what I've been showing.
That's great. Thanks, Kevin.
Mhm.
Thanks, Kevin. Any more questions, folks? Okay, great. So no more questions, no more public or no public comment. I will open it up to discussion. Kevin, thanks again. And I'll go to Chris to kick us off.
All right, I guess I have two comments. One is that the Arctic white color, in my opinion, is appropriate and helps to set up that contrast between the main forms and the connecting forms. It's certainly a traditional color, and so I don't have a problem with the Arctic white. The other comment, which is kind of neither here nor there really, is that triple gable statement that you get on the parking lot side. It's a shame that you don't get to see that on the 250 side, just because it makes, I think it gives a lot of interest. It's not, not a requirement, but just more of a suggestion. I think you've done a good job of making essentially the rear side of the building look good, as that's the side that you see from the road. But I think that triple gable is something that I think would enhance the other side of the building too. So that's all my comment.
Great, thanks, Chris. Dade, any comments?
No, appreciate Chris's suggestion. I think that's an interesting one to explore. I think, as I mentioned, I'm sympathetic to staff's comment about the color. I agree with Chris and others that there are examples, and I think it can be appropriate. I just think that something more muted would be still more appropriate to the overall character of the corridor. And then I think whether it's finding three gables on the corridor or finding a slightly different expression to the one gable that's there, just to front it a little more fully, recognizing the challenge of relegated parking, I think could be subtle improvements, but a nice proposal, nice form, scale, and massing overall.
Great, thanks, Dade. Frank, any comments?
I would echo Dade and Chris, and that I think the forms are appropriate. I too would endorse maybe exploration of the triple gable on the roadside, on the 250 side. I don't have a problem with the Arctic white. Again, I think the contrast is important between the Nijiha product and the main forms. And I think with a charcoal roof, white siding, and that bark color, I think it could look really nice. As to how I really appreciate the precedent image for how that roof soffit meets the board and batten siding. I really liked it in the example you showed. Part of the reason I liked it was just the character of the building and the natural wood kind of meeting that metal roof. I'm less convinced that it's going to look as good here, but that's beyond my pay grade to figure out. So otherwise, I really don't have any anxiety about it. I think it's a nice solution.
Great, thanks, Frank. My only comments, and really they echo what everyone else has said. As I mentioned, we did study colors on board and batten, ended up going with Arctic white or a lighter color, so no real issue there. I wondered if it's because you chose all white cars with the exception of one of them. It just looks more white. Yeah, Frank, your comment about the soffit and the roof edge, I would echo that comment. I think maybe when we see the detail there and it reads accurately, it might make more sense. So I'm not sure I would, would want to see something. I'm not able to say it's inappropriate for an entrance corridor. I just would like to see what it looks like and how it's developed. And I will be the man on the island who says that the three gables, I get it, facing the entrance corridor, but it feels more to me like a standard strip mall when you have three equal gables facing an entrance corridor, whereas when you look at it from the other direction and you see a central gable with two flanking wings, it starts to feel a little bit different. And so I'm not sure that's a bad thing, but again, that's just a personal feeling. The only thing I did think about on the entrance corridor side is if the central gable is, from a hierarchy standpoint, the most important element, is there something different that you might do with the door as opposed to the two flanking doors on the wings, so that it actually feels a little bit more hierarchically important. Beyond that, I had no additional items. Why don't we jump to the staff recommendations and adjust as necessary? Margaret, do you want to pull those up, or Chris?
If Evan could stop sharing. Thanks. Are you able to see the list of comments?
Yes.
Great. So I think number 3 is the first question. Sounds like everyone was okay with that. Does that one get deleted?
I would ask Dade, I think your thoughts on that. We could also say consider revising.
Yeah, I think if we could take consideration, that would be, I think, helpful just to review an option, I think, but I appreciate the majority sentiment that it's appropriate.
Number 5, consider adding elements in the gable ends of the building.
I think continued consideration of the louver or some other element there it is worth.
I would agree.
Yeah, I agree.
And as an alternative, I think the landscape plan I know is still being developed. The rendering showed a small, like arborvitae or something there. If there were a more ornamental tree or something that could have a canopy that grew into the gable, that might also mitigate it a bit.
Is it necessary? Does anyone feel it's necessary to add anything about the roof line and where it meets the walls, the soffit, the fascia? I know that'll be developed.
I think it is.
Okay.
Again, I continue to have some anxiety, and I'm trying to figure out why I have anxiety. And part of it, I think, may be just the roof pitch. It's the precedent they showed had a very steep roof pitch to it, which I think helped greatly in the overall composition of the building. I think the roof pitches here are low enough that it kind of feels, I don't know, cottagey almost. Like I don't know the right way to express it, but that's I guess maybe what causes me a little more anxiety over that detail that Fred you're referencing.
Got it. Would we want to say something like further refine the detail between wall and roof edge? And I don't know, consider, I mean, this is all something that they'll probably do anyway. Consider it within context of the roof pitch. I don't know. Help me, guys.
We did, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to or allowed to jump in here.
Sure.
Okay, great, thanks. We did look at, we had originally shown it as a 9/12 pitch. It's 8 currently. We had looked at even steeper, a 10 and a 12. And I think the comment about the gable ends blankness and that the additional height on this started to get just a little bit more maybe noticeable or more concerning. As that roof got steeper, that area got taller. So it was trying to find that balance, that middle ground with the 8/12, which seems to be, you know, from our perspective was a good middle ground. But I appreciate the comment. And I think also that if we were to render with the, you know, the proper maybe 1.5 inch overhang, and we got that shadow line in there, and there was a little piece of metal flashing that came through, and that complexity was up there.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful, and we'll come back with that rendering. I'm hopeful that that could maybe address and satisfy what exactly it's going to look like.
Sounds good. I'm trying to think, Will, you may have mentioned this. I think maybe Frank, you had a question about this. Will there be gutters along the front
No.
two wing at all? No. Okay. Does everybody think that comment makes sense?
I do. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not sure it would, I'm not sure I'd vote against this because of that concern. I don't know that it's that significant. I don't, even the addition of you know, half round gutters on the gable roofs maybe helps create that a little bit more of that shadow line. I don't know.
To me, it feels like you know, they're kind of shooting for this just pure elemental form and
Yeah.
trying to minimize that
Yeah.
Right.
I think you're right.
transition from like roof to gable as much as possible. So to me, it seems, you know, that the detail matches the intent, and you know, I don't have a problem with it. I think, you know, trying to define it or making it, you know, bigger is kind of going against what they're trying to achieve with it. But
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay. Well, if everyone's okay, we'll just leave the comment the way it is. Doesn't really push into further definition. It's more of a refinement. Great. So any other comments and any of the other comments? All look straightforward.
From a next steps perspective, do we submit for final, or do we work session these options, or what is best for the board and the staff? There's a few like consider things that you know, we'd welcome feedback on, but I'm not sure the best way to get that into the hands.
I think
Dave, do you have any thoughts on that? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Margaret.
Oh, I was just going to suggest that a final submittal that would be address the comments from the initial site plan review, and that address this, the architectural issues from today, would be the typical next step. And then after that, if there were items that needed to be addressed in work session, that's when that would happen.
Okay, so do we show like 2 options in a final submission?
I think you guys should go with what you believe is the best solution.
Okay, all right, we'll put our best foot forward.
Yeah, it's not up to us to design it. You guys, you're the.
For just to get a few more comments nailed down, did the board have any preference on number 5? We were showing those horizontal break lines at the gable element versus a vent, or we're still to consider that and propose what we think is best? Is that the direction?
Yes, I would think so.
Okay. And number 14 would be provide landscaping at the base. And we had talked about that top ivy that kind of filters down. I think from a practical standpoint, it's going to be a stronger option just because getting hardy plants to grow in that strip at the base of a retaining wall, especially on it's facing south, can be challenging. And we could have creeping ivy sort of hang over the wall. We've had it done successfully in other projects, but just wanted to get the board's input on that.
I think that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, so.
Right?
Kevin, I think to your question about, what's typical, this is, at least in my opinion, this submission was pretty well developed, and gave us a lot to really think about and look at, and it gave you better feedback because of that. So
Yeah,
I think we all appreciate that work and look forward to the final submission. Margaret, there's no action, right? This is just preliminary?
Right.
Okay. All right. Kevin and Evan, thank you very much. And we'll talk to you soon.
okay. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate the feedback.
Thanks, guys.
Everybody, I'm going to exercise a little chef's prerogative because I messed up. So I'm just going to back up for a second and go to public comment. Carolyn, are there any members of the public that want to make a comment about a project that is not on the agenda for review?
No, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to ARB 2020-131, White Gables. Turn it over to you, Margaret.
Do you see my title slide?
You do.
Great. Okay. This is a proposal. Oh, let me make one other adjustment so I can see my notes. Okay. This is a proposal to build 3 buildings that constitute the eastern half of the White Gables development. The site is located on the north side of Route 250 West across from Birdwood Golf Course. And the ARB previously reviewed the original site plan and all of the building designs for this development beginning back in 2002. The current application is a major site plan amendment to address both site and architectural changes to the 3 eastern pavilions. Construction of pavilions 1, 3, and 5, which are the pavilions on the west side of the site, is complete. The photo in this slide is a view of Pavilion 5, which is located at the south end of the western side of the site. This view shows the frontage along the entrance quarter street. It shows that there are some trees that limit the view of the buildings in the development. However, views are available into the site, particularly in the winter. And the south elevation of Pavilion 6 is expected to have some visibility from the street and probably similar to that of Pavilion 5, which is the one that's visible at the left side of this image. Proposed site changes include a slight shift in the orientation of the pavilions to be more regularly aligned. Previously, the pavilions' orientations shifted to address the curving internal road. And although that seems appropriate when viewing from locations interior to the site, it probably isn't really that obvious from the entrance quarter street. Another change is the removal of the curved site wall that was originally proposed south of Pavilion 6. The curved wall at Pavilion 5 was constructed, but the current plans no longer show the wall at Pavilion 6, and we've recommended that the wall be retained. That wall was one of the elements of the original design that established a balanced development around the historic manor house. This view shows the manor house at the center and the south elevations at Pavilions 5 and 6 more or less mirroring each other on either side of the house. The symmetrical or mirrored elevations were also part of that balanced design. This slide compares the previously approved design for the south elevation of Pavilion 6 with the current proposal. You can see that they're very different, or the materials are generally consistent, and because there isn't expected to be a clear view of the 3 buildings together, perfect symmetry may not be necessary. But because we expect some visibility of Pavilion 6, we've recommended additional detailing for the south elevation, particularly at the eastern end of the elevation for more consistency with Pavilion 5. Our comments have focused on the south elevation of Pavilion 6 because we believe that's what will ultimately be visible from the entrance quarter street. but the sequence of construction is Pavilion 2 first, then 4, and then 6. We think that the visibility of Pavilions 2 and 4 will be extremely limited, even before Pavilion 6 is built. So we've made no recommendations for them, but visibility of all the pavilions should be a point of your discussion today. So there are 3 issues that are the primary areas of concern for this proposal. It's the diminishing of the balanced design around the manor house, the removal of the curved site wall, and the significantly changed design of the south elevation of Pavilion 6. Our comments in the staff report also include some lighting issues and other technical items that are easily resolved, mostly with notes on the plan. That's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to try to answer any questions you have or move back to any other images that you might want to see.
Great. Thanks, Margaret. Very helpful. I'll start with Chris. Any questions?
No, I have a question for the applicant, but none for Margaret.
Okay, great. Frank Stoner, any questions?
Margaret, can you go back to that view from 250 looking up at, yeah. So I don't see the site wall in front of the pavilion on the left. Is there any place from which that wall is visible along the corridor, and will there be any place that that site wall is visible on the east side here?
That's a good question. It's my impression that there would be some visibility of it. And while you all are talking, I can look back through my photos and see if I've got anything that would clear that up for the one that's already constructed.
Because there is a pre-existing site wall along the frontage.
That's right. There are walls all along the frontage.
And then it seems to me there is a connector road plan between that maybe comes from the site adjacent to this intersection. Is that still?
This interior road continues off, as you look at this view, off to the left to the next property, and then this travelway ends I think right about where these vehicles are, possibly with future connection off to the other site.
Okay. That's great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Frank. Dave, any questions?
Thank you, Fred, and thank you, Margaret. I apologize. I can still see everyone on screen, but I lost the visuals of Margaret's screen. But Margaret, can you remind me the landscape, the mature landscape that's there, the large magnolia and the hedge around the old mansion, are those part of the approved site plan so that those are expected to remain?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's my only question.
Great, thanks, Dave. And Frank Hancock, welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks, Margaret. I don't have any questions.
All right, great. I don't have any questions either. They were answered. Thank you. Okay, we will ask the public. Carolyn, are there any folks who would want to comment on this?
We don't have anybody but us in the meeting right now.
Oh, okay, well, that makes it easy.
Yep.
All right. Is there an app? So there's no applicant presentation, I assume then? Or no?
Scott Collins.
Oh, got it. Okay. Sorry, I can't see everybody's names. So I'll turn it over to the applicant. To start their presentation.
Great. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Margaret, for that great staff report. Yeah, as Margaret kind of indicated, this project was first approved in 2002. It was approved in 2006. It had a series of other approvals with some site plan amendments up until about 2009, up until the economic downturn. It was a very successful project with the first 3 buildings until the condo market just completely went away in 2009. And it's taken a while to come back, but this product is now found a lot in the city, and there's not a whole lot of this type of product in the county. So we see that this is going to be very successful again. And there's a new developer who's partnering with Robinson Development to take over the project and continue the project out. And that's what we're presenting today. As Margaret kind of indicated, it's not a whole lot different from what some of the earlier approved plans. I think, from a site plan standpoint, other than sort of reorienting the buildings to kind of give that linear feel, that's really about the only change on the site aspect. Other than a little bit of stormwater change that we felt it would be a little bit better, but that's all in the back of the site, and kind of rerouting some of the utilities, making all that work. I think the biggest change, as Margaret kind of indicated in the staff report, was some of the architectural elements of the building, and certainly, we did try to kind of keep with the characteristic and the design, overall design, of what's been originally approved and what the units look like across the street, but also try to sort of incorporate what's today's market and today's buyers also looking for. Certainly a lot of things have changed in the world over the last 10 years. And I think that's what they've really looked at doing, is still keeping the elements of the buildings 1, 3, and 5, but updating it to what, some of the more desirable market trends have been over the past 8 or 10 years. And the architects are on this call as well. And they can certainly jump in after I'm done and talk a little bit more about the architectural elements of the site, of the proposal. From a site standpoint, I don't really have any huge issues with what Margaret talked about in her presentation. As far as that the curved retaining walls, it was a 3-foot sort of curvilinear wall. I didn't really think you could probably see it from 250. I didn't quite, looking back at it, and to the 10 years out from when that, or 15 years out when that wall was first probably proposed, I just didn't see a lot of benefit from it. But if that's something that the board really would like to see incorporated, we don't have a problem with it. We can incorporate that back into the design element if that's desired. We don't have a problem with that. I don't think I have any other issues with a couple of lighting comments. And from a site standpoint, like I said, I think this is very similar to what was already reviewed and approved. And I'll turn it over to Clark now to talk more about the architecture of the building and get into some of the elements that have been modified since then.
Hi, this is Clark Gathright. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great.
Hey, Clark.
I don't know that I have much to say other than we're really trying to keep it in keeping with the existing buildings and maintain a timeless feel. I guess one thing initially here, we're just looking at Pavilion 2 to start in the near future, and Pavilion 6 with some of the considerations about matching Pavilion 5. Certainly we can take that on in time. But yes, we're just trying to maintain the flavor that's there for the most part. And really what's changed is the interior, and we've adjusted the exterior to match that, the layouts internally. Anyway, if that's all I have to say. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to help.
Okay, thanks, Clark. Thank you, Scott. Any other comments from the applicant? All right, we will go into questions. I'll start with Chris.
So this is getting to the staff comment regarding Pavilion 6 and adding more detail to that south facade. Pavilion 5 has those extensive porches, which add a lot of interest to that. And I noticed on the site plan, the south kind of facade of Pavilion 6 is a lot closer to the setback than the Pavilion 5, which is built. Is that what's preventing you from adding those porches, or is that just generated from other requirements.
Well, I think they came from other, the internal layout more than trying to match Pavilion 5. And it'll be interesting to see how much of Pavilion 6 we will be able to see with the mature trees there. Pavilion 5 has, you have the entrance way going up there, and you get a good straight shot at the end of that building. Just looking at the Margaret's pictures, it may be that the porch front of the building may be all that's visible through all the mature trees along the front there.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Frank Hancock?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Frank Stoner?
I don't have any questions either, Fred.
All right, and Dade?
Thank you, Fred. Chris, I appreciate raising the question about the porches. I guess in lieu of those, or are there any other alternatives you've considered to address staff's comment about adding more architectural features and detail at that elevation?
Well, certainly not since we've received the comments, but we are certainly willing to pursue that further as we proceed.
Okay, thank you. That was my only question.
Great, thanks, Dade. My only question is probably for Scott. Was the wall that we're talking about, was that required for a grade change, or was it purely ornamental?
It was, thanks, Brett. It was purely ornamental. It's not necessary for grade change. It's pretty, I think we have it graded out right now at about a 8-to-1 slope, coming down from there down to the connector road to the east. That's already been installed as well. So it's just purely ornamental. It would be a freestanding retaining wall, basically, a freestanding wall.
Okay, got it. And I'm trying to quickly scroll through my images that you all provided. Is it accurate to say that all 3 of the building blocks are the same height?
They are.
Okay. And am I reading it correctly that they're at least a story taller than the ones adjacent to them, to the west?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Do you know the difference in height between the ones on the left and the ones on the ones to the west and the ones to the east?
Yeah, the ones on the west sit up about 6 or 8 feet higher. So that's why we were comfortable with proposing these buildings at 1 story higher, so that ultimately they'd be the same height or thereabouts. Enough you wouldn't see it. You wouldn't see you wouldn't see a noticeable change.
Got it. Okay, that's great. Thank you. All right, those were my only questions. Let's see. I guess we now move on to discussion.
And I'm going to share an image if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Go back to this street view. Are you able to see the street view?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So just given monitors and street view the way it is, but that the wall in front of that existing pavilion is right here.
Got it.
So it's there, it's visible. You probably wouldn't notice it if you weren't looking for it.
Right. Okay, thank you. All right. Well, I'll open it up for discussion. I'll start with Frank Hancock.
Thanks, Fred. I think it's a nice proposal. I think the building is far enough away from the corridor. I think it's compatible with, the existing architectural detailing and style and character. And I don't know, if it's worth kind of fussing over some of the more, how do you articulate some things on the building? I don't know how visible it will be. I like the height at, this location on the corridor as you start to come into the city. And it's further mitigated because it's, a couple hundred feet back from the corridor. So I think that's entirely appropriate. I love the language of the stone out in front, and that's all staying. I think it's got a really kind of layered landscape approach that helps it, that really softens it from the corridor. So all in all, feels entirely appropriate.
Great, thanks, Frank. Frank Stoner?
Thanks, Fred. I would echo what Frank Hancock just said. I think there's a lot of mature landscaping on the site that's going to remain, which will block the view of this building from many perspectives. Having said that, I think it might be helpful to see a perspective from the road where the building is actually visible, just to get a better sense of what it'll actually look like. I don't have any problem with the architecture. Much like Frank, I'm not sure it's worth spending a lot of effort trying to revise the detailing of the rear portion of that pavilion on the east side. I think the materials are compatible, and so I'm just not sure and you're going to notice it, quite frankly. That's all.
Great, thank you. Dade, comments?
Sure, thank you, Fred. I think, like my colleagues, I think the proposal is largely compatible with what's there, and it is going to be less visible due to the current mature landscaping. I'm sure there will come a day when that landscaping subsides and it has to be reestablished, and in that instance would be interested in some further consideration to address staff's comment about the south elevation facing the EC more than the east one. But that's all I have today. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dade. And Chris?
Yeah, I'm pretty much in agreement with what everyone else has said. I think it's appropriate as is, and I think the existing landscape provides enough screening that aside from seeing just the mass of the building kind of through the foliage, I don't think it's going to be that visible. So.
Great, thanks. I echo everybody else's comments. I thought, Frank, your comment about perspective, just to kind of give us a sense of the way it might appear from the entrance corridor, would be helpful, especially considering that it's a different height, and to Scott's comments about how that's mitigated by the slope of the land. Not sure if anybody mentioned anything about the wall. I do like the walls that are there. They're beautiful. If it's not needed for site reasons, like a retaining wall, I guess I would probably say, does the application stand on its own without the wall, and start there? And my sense is it would, because of all of the mitigating factors everyone else just mentioned, like the landscaping and the distance from the corridor. If this were up closer, I think I maybe have a different thought, but it's probably, or if it was absolutely necessary for site reasons. Other than that, the only other thing I'll mention is, I know Clark mentioned in his presentation that, they're going to start with block 2 and they could come back when they're ready to do block 6. Just to clarify, we're reviewing this, or pavilion 6, we're reviewing this as a whole, right? We're not just, so they're really, yeah, when we approve it, we're approving pavilion 6. Okay. Great. Any other comments before we look at the staff review? All right, let's go to staff recommendations. Please, Margaret.
Are you able to see the Word document?
Yes.
So the first comment is about the additional detailing on that south elevation.
What does everybody think?
I think it wouldn't hurt to consider it, but I personally wouldn't consider it a requirement.
Agreed.
Agreed.
So we can leave it as is.
I think 2 through 6 are mostly just notes and technical.
Yeah.
Number 7 is about the curved wall.
I don't personally feel like it's necessary, but I leave that to others.
I'm okay if we strike that.
Yeah, I don't think it would be missed if it wasn't there.
No, I agree.
Okay. And number 8 is about just showing the tree protection fencing, and that's a standard, just technical thing that we often see. You have 2 options. You can either just provide preliminary comments, or given the extensive review that this project has had over the years and the limited comments you have today, you could choose to approve it with the with conditions being the comments that we just ran through.
And if you choose, you can bring it back to us, right? If we go with that option.
I do think that it might be worth adding another comment to Fred's point and mine, that it'd be nice to see a perspective from 250.
I would agree.
Where the building is visible.
Good idea.
Pavilion 6, yeah.
In that case, you'll want to see that back again. Or do you want to see that in a work session? Just that item itself?
I don't even know that we need to see it as long as you see it.
Okay. And if there's a problem?
And if there's a problem, you could bring it back. Otherwise.
Okay.
All right. Does everyone agree that we can move forward with a motion, or is there any concern with that?
I'd support a motion.
Okay, awesome. Do we have a motion?
I will move to approval of certificate of appropriateness for ARB 2020-131 White Gables with conditions listed in the staff report, amended as follows. We are striking, can you scroll back up just so I can see all the, okay. We're striking item 7 and adding an item 9 that says provide a perspective view from Route 250, clarifying the visibility of Pavilion 6.
I'll second.
Great. Carolyn, vote.
Okay. Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Henningsen,
Aye.
Mr. Vanderwerf,
Aye.
Mr. Missile.
Aye. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we will move on now to our work session, I believe. And this is the work session on RIO 29 form-based code. Rachel Falkenstein, welcome. Leah Broomfeld, welcome. Everyone else, welcome. People are popping on. Thanks for joining us today. And I think I turn it over to Rachel, right, to introduce your team?
Yes, thank you everyone for having us today. I'm Rachel Falkenstein, Planning Manager. I'm joined by my colleagues, Michaela Accardi and Leah Brumfield. And actually, Leah is going to kick us off today with a little project background. She'll go over our agenda, but our main topic will be after a few minutes of staff presentation where we'll get your feedback on the architecture section of the code. So Leah, take it away.
Let's see if this will work. There we go. All right. You guys see the presentation?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. So thanks everyone for letting us present this to you today. Let's see, we can get that to work. Yes. So as we stated, my name is Leah Brumfield. We are going to be presenting a background of the project, the development scenarios, which I'll describe a little bit later, and then go into discussion and review with input from the Architectural Review Board. And finally, what's going to happen next and our plan for implementation and adoption for this. So throughout the process of designing the form-based code, which I'm sure we're all a little bit familiar with right now, for the Route 29 small area plan vision of creating a walkable dense area in the Route 29 area, we have had a lot of input, we've had a lot of collaboration, we've worked across departments, across different groups of people. We contracted with the Form-Based Code Institute to do a peer review of the draft that staff has prepared. And through them, we also contracted with Dover Cole to create design scenarios to demonstrate the feasibility of the project that we're working on. Throughout, we also engaged with the Route 29 Steering Committee, which is made up of property members, property owners, business owners, developers, other local parties with vested interest in the Route 29 area. And we have brought specific questions to the board and the Planning Commission work sessions, and we'll be bringing the actual drafts to them for public hearing in the next quarter, for the first quarter of 2021. We did meet with the ARB, which you may remember, 2019 and 2020 for input. Specifically, we were looking for input on the form-based code standards that support the code replacing ARB review for entrance corridor properties within the Route 29 form-based code district. So we've discussed architectural standards that we've incorporated, transparency, facade articulation, building materials, and lighting materials. So the goal for today is to share the completed, well, mostly completed current draft of the form-based code. We have incorporated a lot of feedback in that, and so we'll be describing some of the specific feedback we've received and the changes there. And we want to get the ARB's feedback on the design standards, and particularly the materials standards. Those did not receive as much attention in previous discussions. And so we feel that's really one of the big points that we want to discuss with the ARB and get your feedback on to make sure that the draft meets the standards that are going to bring about the development that we want. So these design standards developed by Dover Cole were part of our contracted consultant services, and we wanted to demonstrate that the code could achieve the goals we envisioned and that the code was feasible for developers and property owners. The scenarios aren't proposals, they're not really design requests, they're just imagination proposals, something to see what could be here to help envision something different than what is. So 3 scenarios were developed for the 3 character areas in the form-based code area. The first is the core. The core character area is I believe, located entirely within the entrance corridor. So these are going to be the densest, most urban character areas. The first scenario is at the location of Brio 29 and Brio and 29, where there's currently a Hardee's. It's all mostly single family retail parking lots right now. And this development scenario would be one of the faces of the area. It incorporates some of the existing structures, demonstrating we can have that and still achieve the looks that we're looking for, but it does largely have taller, more dense new developments. And in particular, it relegates parking to the rear, creating more welcoming facades. So we are also looking at the civic space that you can see in this shot of the development scenario, and buildings over 4 stories tall, a variety of facades, a variety of uses. The second scenario we're looking at is in the flex. Again, a good deal of the flex would be in entrance corridor, particularly this section, the 29th Place Shopping Center. We are particularly interested in the phased infill of large parking lots and the redevelopment of areas that could have structured parking and also reduced parking requirements. This adds residential and office above retail. This also incorporates a parking garage, which is the white building in the middle to the right, directly off of 29. It does have a central civic space. It has pedestrian streets providing safe walking areas between buildings. And overall, it's just a much more integrated, interesting space. We also have a mix of architectural styles here. And again, there's very little parking visible, just a little bit of street parking to give you a teaser. And most of the parking is relegated to the rear. The final scenario, which is on Brookmar Drive, is modeled on a Greensfield site that is owned by the county. It's between the fire station and rescue station and a mixed medical office building. So, oops, there we go. This scenario demonstrates the potential for housing, for just general housing that fits within the form-based code and it fits within the area fairly seamlessly. This was designed as affordable housing or mixed income housing. And again, it just adds to the landscape. It fits very easily within there, and it does not detract from the area's architectural styles or the views, despite it being a fairly dense residential development. So hopefully, as we're looking through these, we're sparking imagination, looking at scenarios, and trying to figure out how they would fit in and meet our goals. So I will hand this over to start review of the code itself.
Thanks, Leah. So before we get into the architecture section, I was just going to do a quick overview of all the other sections of the code. And I'm going to go really quickly, but happy to come back if there's anything you'd like to hear more detail about. So I'm just going to share kind of what changes we've made to the draft code since we met with you all last and since you last had an opportunity to review it. Some overarching changes would just be the level of detail that's in there. There's quite a bit more detail and getting down into the nitty gritty of things that we need to do to have this be a complete ordinance. One other big change is we've incorporated graphics to help the users to understand some of the regulations and the requirements of the code. Next section, Leah. So now I'm going to go through just in order of the content that appears in the draft. And the first section is the administration. And if you recall, we're structuring this as an optional overlay. So the current zoning will stay in the area, but property owners who wish to develop or redevelop their property have the option to choose to develop under the form-based code. If they choose to develop, they can do so under form-based code by right. So they don't have to go through a rezoning process to develop under the form-based code. And we think there are a lot of benefits of doing so, and this slide kind of summarizes some of those. Next slide. And so the administration section it kind of talks about how to use the code. It goes through the optional overlay district. And essentially the way it would work is that a property owner who opted in would have to opt in for the whole property. And they would have to opt into all the regulations within the code. So they couldn't pick and choose, and they couldn't just apply it to like one corner of the property. It would apply to the whole parcel. And the next slide goes into that a little bit more. So if we have one of these large shopping centers, there are several in the area, and they opt into the form-based code, they can phase their redevelopment, but they would have to show us a plan of how they would phase it. So they couldn't just choose to do one thing in the corner without thinking about how it would impact the whole site and how the whole site would develop. So they would need to come in with a plan showing us that phase if they wanted to apply it to a larger parcel, but only start with one small area. And the next slide will go into the regulating plan. You've probably seen this before. We have 3 areas identified in the form-based code. There's the core shown in red, the flex shown in white, and the blue is the edge. And there are different regulations for each of the 3 areas. The red core area is the highest intensity, and then it tapers off as you get to the outer edges. The next section of the code talks about uses, and I won't go into a lot of detail about this, but just to share that it's a different approach that we've done before. Our existing zoning ordinance goes into great detail and lists, dozens and dozens of uses for each district. We've tried to be more succinct and have categories of uses, and most things are allowed because this is a form-based code. The form is more important than the uses, but we do want to make sure that impacts are still mitigated for some uses that might have noise or traffic impacts, for instance. The next section of the code goes into our street standards. You recall we have different street types identified in the small area plan, and this section talks about what facilities and elements are required on each type of street, and also has certain amenities that are required along the street, such as seating, benches, lighting, trees, and there are graphics to go along with each of these. One of them is shown here on this slide. And then the next slide shows a street section and the dimensions required for each of the elements. The streets will still be public elements dedicated to VDOT, elements that are not accepted by VDOT, which could be possible here if we have some wider sidewalk or things like the benches, street benches and lighting. Those will still be required to be publicly accessed, and the maintenance will need to be worked out in cooperation with the county and the owner. Next section is building standards. Again, this talks about what the building should look like, where it should be located on the site, kind of the massing and building location, so setbacks, heights, things like that. I won't go into great detail, but if you have questions, we'd be happy to come back. The next section is parking. Again, this is a little bit different approach for us. We have greatly reduced our parking requirements in terms of numbers. The maximums are much lower than what you see in the code right now. We have 1 space per 1,000 gross square feet is the minimum requirement, and then the maximum 150% of that. But we're really trying to encourage a shared parking approach so people can share with their neighbors and have, instead of each site having their own individual parking, it can be more of a shared approach. The next section of the code will be your architecture, but we're saving that for the end, and Michaela's going to talk about that. So we'll skip over that and go to civic spaces. Each site is required to have a certain percentage of their land dedicated to what we're calling civic spaces. And this is, we're using the word civic because we're requiring these spaces to be open to the public. A lot of times in our private residential subdivisions, they'll have open space requirements and they'll be held by the private subdivision. But in this case, we are asking for these spaces to be dedicated to the public, and there are standards about what these spaces should include within them. Next section of the code used to be incentives last time you saw it, but we've updated the incentive section and decided to take that out and incorporate some of the elements within other areas of the code. And then the only incentive that remains is a height addition for affordable housing, and that's the last section of the code. So there are 2 elements of affordable housing. One is your required affordable housing, and that matches our affordable housing policy that's going through the review process right now with the board and planning commission reviews happening recently. And then there's an additional incentive or height bonus. If you go above and beyond these minimum required percentages, you can receive a height bonus. So that was a rapid fire session of everything that's in the code except for architecture. I'm going to turn it over to Michaela now to finish us off with the architecture portion.
Thank you, Rachel. And as we need to during the discussion portion, we can refer back to any of the portions of the code and pull up the user guide as needed. Since we really wanted to focus on the architectural design standards with you all, we provided this slide here with some background from the draft form-based code framework, which was really an outline that we shared with the board in December of 2019. And we had, before that went to the board, we engaged with the Architectural Review Board to ask about the process piece for the form-based code. And we heard support for basically not providing for an ARB review for the parcels in the RIO 29 area and incorporating the entrance corridor guidelines within the code by having standards for transparency, materials, facade articulation, lighting, parking structures, and equipment and service areas. So on the next slide, we shared the revised draft with the consultant team and a range of stakeholders over the past year. And we've heard and got some great ideas about standards for regulating facade articulation and transparency. Lots of form-based codes do this work. So we had lots of great references to work off of, which are reflected in the current draft. We also have a few different codes for really detailed design standards that are closer to historic districts and areas that have a consistent architectural style, but are future references for our team should we decide to go into greater detail in future iterations of the code. And as Leah mentioned at the beginning of our work session, we've worked with the ARB through virtual work sessions like this, as well as earlier in 2020, we had some feedback forms that we tried as a method to get some feedback in a different way. So on the next slide, this is one of a couple of slides detailing the current code, which in the user guide that Margaret sent you all last week, this is basically going through pages 42 through 45 of the user guide. And you'll see that the first significant standard that's in this section is transparency, and there are percentages of ground story and upper story transparency that we worked with you all on. We got some great feedback from consultants, and this area refers to the amount of glass within the frames of windows and doors as a percentage of the building facade. And it's probably a helpful reference to know that in the most dense, walkable, urban area is the core, and the ground story transparency there is 60% and the upper story transparency is 40%. And it steps down from that for each of the different character areas. And we've also introduced transparency requirements for buildings with frontage along Route 29 to make sure that there's still ample windows and doors, but we acknowledge that people will probably be walking more actively on the interiors of the spaces. So the transparency requirements there are 30% and 25% respective to the ground and upper stories. The other thing that the code does on this slide shown is the facade articulation. And I know we've worked with this group at pretty significant length to talk about how we should determine a maximum facade segment length. So basically trying to figure out how long a facade should go without a visual or physical break in the plane. And the current code has this based on height, and we have a diagram shown, and basically as a function of height, that maximum facade segment length changes. You can go to the next slide, Leah. This slide is really just outlining how the entrance corridor guidelines are incorporated into the draft code. There are minimum planting requirements that differ by street type. There are also lighting requirements that align with the entrance corridor guidelines, as well as mechanical service and loading requirements, screening for those areas. And then there is a draft permitted and prohibited building materials list that we would definitely like this group's feedback on that list. So on the next slide, I think, is our first question. And we can certainly answer any clarifying questions before this, but I think our overarching question for the Architectural Review Board is whether the entrance corridor guidelines are sufficiently incorporated into this code, and if you have any other comments or recommendations. Our second question is about the building materials list. We'll start with the first one, and I think you can go ahead and stop sharing screens, Leah, and I will have the user guide up to share if we need to refer to it specifically.
Great. Well, great presentation. And this is really excellent work. I'll say as an aside, I was having a conversation with a prior city councilor a couple days ago, and they were complimenting primarily the three of you on the work that you've done on this subject. So congratulations on this. It's really, really well done. I will go ahead, I guess, and go around the room and ask for comments. Why don't I start with Frank Hancock? Or how do we want to do this? Is it easier to go individually, or should we just sort of free for all?
Whatever is best for this group. It's fine to go through individually, and if we want to have a discussion also afterwards at the end of that, that's helpful.
Yeah, let's do that. This group's a little crazy, so we'll go with Frank Hancock.
The first question, are we just trying to answer the first question?
Yes, we can start there. General feedback on incorporating the entrance corridor guidelines.
I think you've done a good job of incorporating the guidelines. It's a very thorough document. I had a few things for the second question, but I don't really have any comments on the first question. So nice work.
Thanks, Frank. Chris?
Yeah, I don't have any comments on the first question, and admittedly, I'm coming into this discussion late. And this may be off topic, but the transparency requirements seem a little bit restrictive, particularly the 60% in the core zone. I get where that's coming from, but that 60% seems like it, is pointing you towards retail and, making it much harder to do some other functions where you might not want, all that transparency. So, that was my only general comment about the whole thing.
Michaela, did you have any thoughts on that, or do you want to wait for us to go around?
Whatever y'all would prefer. I think we've definitely spent a great deal of time on these transparency numbers and feel comfortable with the recommendation given the feedback we got from the consultant team, but I certainly understand the concern there about anything that might be restrictive. Our team's approach so far has been to put the design standard requirements into the code and be less restrictive on use so that these spaces could transition in their use over time while having a consistent ground floor appearance. But again, open to feedback, and we'll certainly take into consideration everything we hear today.
Great, thank you. Frank Stoner.
Thanks, Fred. It's a lot to absorb. Question as it relates to that transparency issue in the core, are we allowing residential uses on the ground floor? And I guess that speaks to Chris's question or concern about that transparency. Are we what does the form-based code say about that? And because I notice a number of the buildings that are shown, certainly in the edge and the flex area, actually appear to be residential, not commercial, or perhaps some mix of office and residential, but not retail. And in either case, yeah, that transparency question, I think, is a valid one.
So multifamily and single family attached are permitted in the core on the ground stories and the upper stories. So only single family detached is restricted in the core.
And would the 60% transparency apply to those buildings as well?
Yes, it would, as it's written.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that being problematic. I don't know whether it's possible to simply, as you're doing with the floor-to-floor height requirement, simply make it convertible so that if that space were to transition from residential to commercial at some point in the future, that you could accommodate the additional transparency, but not necessarily mandate it in conjunction with a residential or office use.
Great, thanks, Frank. Any other comments?
No, I don't. I guess I had questions of just the entrance corridor guidelines and the way in which those are integrated into this document. I'm a little fuzzy on, just because I can't remember all the entrance corridor guidelines. Certainly relegated parking was one, and I think it's nice the way they managed to achieve some of those relegated parking objectives, even for the buildings that are on 29, kind of having dual frontage. But it does illuminate, I think, the need for structured parking fairly early in the process if they're actually going to achieve those goals. And I guess to the point about if you opt into the form-based code, you have to opt in for the entire parcel. I could see that creating a significant burden for the development community early on, because they're not going to build all those buildings at once. You know, can they transition? Is there a period during which they could transition to structured parking and still allow surface parking in areas that might not technically meet the current corridor guidelines? I don't know if that makes any sense, but.
Sure. That would be the kind of thing that would be addressed in the phased plan. So we do have the phased plan permitted, so that exactly the kind of situation that you're describing, where they want to redevelop one building, but the rest of the structures are working fine. They may not be great, but they don't want to redevelop them right now. As long as the plan incorporates the streets and the future phases into those plans. So where is the civic space going to be? How much of it is going to be dedicated? Then the phase plan can move forward.
Gotcha. Okay. That's great. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Frank. Anything else? Okay, Dave?
Sure. Thank you, Fred, and Michaela, Rachel, and Leah, my compliments as well to you for all the work and how far you've advanced this. I think in terms of the entrance corridor guidelines, it looks like there are sections that address explicitly planting and lighting and mechanical screening, and I think that is very good to cover it. Some very minute comments on that. I noticed the color temperature is listed as 2,000 to 3,000 for street and site lighting, which is very warm. I don't know whether that's intentional and whether there might be leeway on that. The foot candle level of 5 is a little high, at least relative to some campus environments where I think 2 foot candles often are recommended, but interested in understanding the origin of the requirement. And I think for the mechanical screening, the way that the guidelines typically just say that mechanical equipment shall not be visible, I think is the simplicity of that statement may be worth using. I think that as everything in all those conditions are enumerated, in some ways, those things that aren't enumerated may be implied to be allowed. So just a brief couple thoughts there. I think on the facade articulation, I think the section as it's written right now is getting close to successful at what I would say is really a facade massing approach. I don't know if that section yet addresses articulation in terms of windows and doors and bays and elements and rhythms, or any kind of requirements for how the composition of those might support the overall guideline of human scale and and building tradition. So I guess I would just ask how that section might be expanded for that. And I think in terms of the means of facade articulation, it looks like changes in color are permitted without change in plane. And it doesn't, it's not clear how much buildings have to be relieved from planes of the wall. So I think it might bear considering a little bit more how much relief in the plane of the wall is required to successfully articulate the mass. But again, I think it's a great document, matured a great deal, and I'll look forward to its further evolution.
Great, thank you, Dave. I think I got everybody. I had one kind of general overarching question, and I apologize. I kind of came in, I think, back to the ARB as this was being introduced. So some of this I may have either missed or forgotten, so forgive me if I have. So under the category of sort of architecture and design being an art as opposed to a science in some cases, a lot of what we've got here in the design standards is very much a science, right? There's a percentage calculation window, there's your height calculation based on the width of your building. There are all these things that you could actually design a building utilizing and still have a building that's just not appropriate, right? And so maybe this is some of what Dave was getting to, but how do you handle if this is not going to, these are not going to fall under ARB review? How do you handle that kind of analog, sort of more aesthetic as opposed to the digital calculated building design? And some of this gets back to something Leah said at the beginning of the presentation, which was, here are some images that I'm showing you, and they have a variety of different styles. And in some cases, we might find that, this is the last thing I'll say, that we might find that there's a grouping of styles that are compatible in a certain area. And then another one comes in from left field, it just doesn't match, it just doesn't fit. How do you handle applications that, require that element of sort of aesthetic response?
I can attempt to answer this, and it might not be the answer you want to hear, but if it meets the code, we'll have to approve it. So if you have 7 different architectural styles, but their facade articulation meets what's in the code, we'll have to approve it. One thing I'll share is that as we've gotten into the drafting of the code, we've identified how we're very much in our infancy of this work in terms of design guidance, regulations around things like Dave brought up lighting and additional screening comments. Those are things that we need to continue to evolve and work on countywide, not just in the form-based code. So we have a kind of a running list of future work, and we've worked with the board and planning commission to kind of prioritize what topics we should start with. So this is kind of a first step, adopting this code to just get these basic parameters in place, and hopefully it can continue to evolve. I think one conversation that we've had throughout this process is, what is the architectural style of RIO 29? And we haven't yet identified that. So we would look to you all to help us do that. And as we get further along in that work, we can update the code to reflect that. I understand you're looking at specific entrance corridors now. If you end up doing RIO in 29 and have some more guidance for us, we can come up, we can come back and update the code. But for right now, it's kind of bare bones. It's got, these form requirements that are kind of basic. It's got these material requirements. If it meets those things, it will be approved as drafted.
Thanks, Rachel. That makes sense. That's what I kind of assumed. I guess what I would say is if there's a way to retain an element of review that allows for that aesthetic consideration, it would be helpful. And I don't know how that works. And maybe some of your consultants, the folks that have helped you with this, might have some insight into that. Maybe it's worth asking. But I do think, like we have work sessions, right, where an applicant comes in and we just give them advice almost. Is there an opportunity for an applicant who's coming into the form-based code area to approach the ARB for advice? Or I don't know. I'm thinking out loud. Michaela, I'm not answering your question. I'm sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Oh, no, I appreciate you raising the question of subjectivity. And I guess in the discussions last time, I think the goal of the county is, to find a way to take us out of the equation of this and make it a more streamlined approach. But I think you raise a good point. I think my questions about, for example, facade articulation relate to, I think that to remove that subjective aesthetic judgment maybe requires going a bit further in prescription of what languages, styles, approaches, and things are appropriate, so that we don't have to review it. It unfortunately maybe means a narrower palette of what is acceptable, but I do worry that at least it's good to hear that this is going to be matured for a while, because I think right now it doesn't get far enough in terms of describing sort of the character and quality of elements, I think, to avoid ending up with massing that complies, but buildings that don't necessarily have the character we want.
Thanks. Michaela, to your question specifically, I don't have anything to add other than what everyone else has said.
Well, thanks for all of those comments. You've certainly identified where some of the challenging aspects of this plan are without a consistent architectural style for the area. It can be challenging to write really specific standards. So we'll take all of this into consideration, see what we can do for this first phase of the form-based code. The second question that we have for you today is about building materials, since this was really just shared briefly in a form, feedback form earlier this year. And we realize it can have some implications for developers and property owners. So we want to make sure we are appropriately including building materials. I can share my screen on that page just for everyone to look at. I'll do my best to make it as big as possible while also seeing the whole page. So just direct me as needed. But the page that we're looking at in the user guide is page 45. And I will make this full screen just to the right of your screen.
All right, I'll go and what I can remember as reverse order from our last round. Dade, I think I'm starting with you.
Thank you, Fred. And thank you again, Michaela. I thought this captured a lot of the discussions from last year pretty accurately, as I recalled. I think I recall that we discussed maybe, I'm not sure how much some of these requirements veer into describing sort of backup construction of the materials in the assembly. So, cavity construction for masonry. Certainly that is a better, longer lasting way to build the wall, but I don't know if we necessarily want to prescribe that. And I can imagine scenarios where allowing folks to do thin brick or engineered stone and directly applied to concrete or other structure might allow us in the end to have better material character than if, the choice that folks are facing is between doing hardy board siding or doing masonry cavity wall construction, you know, I worry a little bit that if we prescribe too much how they do the material facing, it might lead folks to less costly solutions that are less diverse. I think that was the main comment I recall. If I think of others, I'll ask to bring them up. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Gosh, I think Frank Stoner.
I guess the only material that seems to be prohibited that I guess is worth some conversation is split face block. Only because I think it can be and has been used successfully in combination with other materials. And so, and can be very attractive. So I guess I'd love for us to revisit that. I didn't have any issue with the other materials as recommended or prohibited.
That was something I marked up as well, or noted that maybe that should move to the limited amounts or special circumstances column. So I agree with you, Frank.
Great. Anything else from either Frank?
Sorry to take over. I'll go back to mute.
All good. All good. Frank Hancock, anything else? Or Frank Stoner? Okay,
I don't think
Chris.
so.
I had a couple little just word choice questions. Up at the top, should it be genuine stone or is that natural stone, or does it matter? Similar to the brick, should we call it clay brick or natural instead of genuine? I was just confused by the word genuine. Under concrete, I wasn't sure what fine concrete block meant, and that might just be, I just don't know. But and then again, the split face block was my only other comment. But other than that, it's a nice list.
I'm sorry to jump back in. I'm looking back up at stone and realize that concrete-based stone is prohibited, which I assume means any kind of simulated stone facade is prohibited. Am I reading that right? So El Dorado stone, for example, would not be allowed?
Margaret, can I lean on you for this question?
Sorry, had trouble unmuting. So this list was put together just taking examples from other communities that had similar regulations. And so we can guess at what they're getting at. And so I think that's probably, I think what you said is probably accurate, Frank, about El Dorado stone. Would probably fall in that category, but that is something that we have approved in the entrance quarters on many occasions.
Yeah, I think if you prohibit that, you're going to get a lot of pushback just because real stone has gotten prohibitively expensive, and quite frankly, some of the concrete-based alternatives are very convincing.
I agree, Frank.
I agree.
I would agree as well.
Great. Chris, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with what Dade said about the applied stone without cavity wall construction. I think generally the restriction should be based on what you see and feel from the outside, regardless of how the construction is actually put together. Also, Frank's comment about split face, if done well, it looks great, particularly, as an accent material. The unfinished or untreated wood, would rule out cedar shakes, which is not really, you don't see it very often, but it is a natural material that you know, you see it more often in New England, obviously, but you do see it here, particularly on roofs. So I don't know if it's worth, you know, making a separate category for that or not. You know, I think unfinished wood siding is probably not a good idea, but cedar is intended to be put up unfinished. So, and that was it for me.
Great, thanks, Chris. I have just one general question and a couple specific things. Was any consideration given to distance from the entrance corridor? So, for example, like, you know, I think we've used, for lack of a better term, fake brick when it's distant from the entrance corridor. Is there any consideration given to that for any of these?
No, there's not currently in the code. This just is uniformly applied.
Okay, all right, got it. So just a couple of things in addition to what my colleagues have said under, and this is maybe a dumb question, but under concrete, gypsum reinforced fiber concrete for trim, is that the same as hardy plank? Is that a different material? Like, in other words, should that go under synthetics and composite?
That's a great question.
And I agree with the split block. For me, this, I don't know, I've actually seen glass block that's been used in a way that makes sense architecturally and is aesthetically appropriate. So I don't know if that's one that anyone else thinks should be shifted to the allowed in limited amounts or not.
Yeah, I agree with you there too.
And then nothing else in addition to what my colleagues have said.
Do you mind repeating what the last material was that you all just collectively said should shift to limited amounts?
Vinyl siding. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding.
I was like,
no, glass block.
Okay.
I think that's it.
Can I just run through this? And I'll make sure that I've got the comments down. Under the stone category, it currently lists stone veneer with cavity wall construction and applied stone without. It sounds like the recommendation would be to revise that to stone veneer as a permitted material. Is that accurate? Okay. And then artificial stone with a concrete base would be shifted to permitted materials. Is that accurate? Okay. Under concrete, for stone and brick where it says genuine, that can certainly be changed to natural. Under concrete, the fine concrete block, I don't know what fine particularly means there. I don't know if Dave or Chris.
Yeah, I think in terms of specifications, there's decorative concrete masonry units, I think is a section that covers ones that have finer aggregates. There's also ground face concrete masonry units that usually have a finer finish. There's something called calcium silicate, which is known by Ariscraft, which can be acceptable, but it's also subject to a lot of staining. But that's another better looking masonry material. I don't know, Chris, what any you would add?
Yeah, I wonder if there's like a catch-all term you could use for the, you know, like decorative face.
Okay.
Yeah, decorative concrete masonry units, including stone, silicate, and ground face.
Yeah.
Block.
Okay. Split face block would move from prohibited materials to allowed in limited amounts, particularly as an accent material. gypsum reinforced fiber concrete could come out of the concrete category. Because we've got the fiber cement siding in the synthetics category below. Glass block would move to allowed in limited quantities. Under wood, the unfinished entry would be limited to siding. And I think that's everything.
Quick question, I guess, with do we want to permit foam plastic moldings and trim? Or
that might be one that would be limited. For example, maybe following the above the first floor or something like that. Would that be reasonable?
yeah, I think so.
Is there general agreement about that?
Yeah, that is becoming more and more common, and painted. You especially from the ground. If you're looking at something on the second floor, I don't think you'd ever know it wasn't painted wood.
Okay. And what would be the correct technical term for it?
Cellular PVC.
Okay.
Can I ask a quick question? Do these materials also cover landscape materials? Are they intended to, or is that a separate section?
This was intended just to cover building materials. We have landscape standards, the minimum planting requirements in the code, but there is also the site plan requirements that this code, where it's silent, will lean on that part of the ordinance as well.
I'm just thinking about retaining wall materials, green screen materials, like what we used out at Stonefield, that are kind of really more, landscape as opposed to building. I know we talk a lot about retaining wall styles and types and dimensions and colors and so on. That might be something to add. And I would just ask ourselves, is there anything else that's site related? Maybe not, but just thinking about site furnishings, things like that. So we don't really get into site furnishings. Great. Any other comments on materials?
Can I ask a question about metal sheets with expressed seams? What exactly is that?
Like standing seam roofing?
I don't know. I mean, in this context, I assume it's wall, not roof. But
yeah,
It makes sense to describe the seams that are permitted, batten seam, others. I don't know, Chris, what were you going to say?
I'm having like a brain freeze. I can't think of the name of the building, but it's the theater in town near the Water Street.
Live art.
Has it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it. Barracks Road Shopping Center has something similar, I believe.
right.
And I think that movie theater in Stonefield
Where
as well,
would
right?
where would like a corrugated galvalume fit in this list of materials? Is that aluminum siding, and would it be prohibited if it was galvanized metal? I assume it could fit under the metal curtain panels wall systems, although it's not really a.
I guess you could call that a metal panel, including pre-finished and cut, stamped, or cast.
Cast.
Is that something that should be broken out of that group? Or is the corrugated galvalume something that you want to add to the prohibited materials?
I wouldn't put it in the prohibited category. I mean, I think
Or
it's
limited?
maybe limited. Yeah. I think it might be worth at least calling it out as kind of maybe under the metal curtain wall system, just because I think it's seems to be used with increasing regularity in certain architectural.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's possible, maybe in general for the metal category, to include some limitation on reflectance and color, or just to the extent we've typically kept things from being too bright.
Yeah, that's over in the allowed in limited amounts state, I think. And that actually was something I was going to mention. It just a nit, but you could read that you should use reflective materials only in small areas, which I think that's what it's intended to say, but maybe rewording that to say like use of reflective materials should be limited to small areas, if that's even acceptable.
That's a good point. Is there a more general term for corrugated galvalume?
Corrugated metal siding. I don't know. I mean, the problem is you get into the whole sort of industrial category of siding profiles that we probably don't want. I guess if something is allowed in limited or special circumstances, staff would determine whether it was limited enough or the circumstances were warranted under the form-based. And how would they make that assessment?
Question. Oh, go ahead, Margaret.
No, good question was all I.
But it's a good question. I think right now the limited circumstances are at least generally detailed in the, in the column, except for those. It's split right now. So it's a good question. We can reflect on that and figure out whether more details needed in this like last column of the table for staff to refer to.
We might need to be careful with EFS, only because a lot of EFS stucco is used in traditional stucco applications. It's indistinguishable from regular stucco. It just happens to be a different composition. Just the finish coat. I don't mean the system. Certainly the foam backing and all that. I think it is appropriate to keep that, but I wouldn't want. Yeah, I'll shut up.
Would it be more accurate to just eliminate the EFS and the styrofoam names and just say synthetic stucco on foam-based, or maybe synthetic
maybe
stucco?
maybe to Frank's point, it starts to get more into the realm of the backup assembly rather than the visible material. So yeah, so synthetic stucco with polymers is, I guess that's the question, is that acceptable, or does all stucco need to be cementitious? The difficulty though also I get with EFS is it puts the insulation plane in a spot where then it's difficult to use anything but EFS on the whole wall.
Yeah, my thought is in terms of just the surface, it's indistinguishable from stucco. I think a lot of times what people don't like about EFIS is that kind of like built up foam trim that you get with EFIS. You know, if you walk by a wall that was stucco and a wall next to it that was EFIS, just flat, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
Doesn't it depend on texture and if it's, I mean, the EFIS that's, I don't know what the right words are, but the ARB approved a building with EFIS that was in a brick pattern because it was over 1,000 feet away, and you couldn't tell that. But up close, I think you can tell that that's not real brick.
Yeah, I think that's a different condition. I think what Chris is referring to is just synthetic elastomeric finish on a flat wall is indistinguishable from real stucco.
Right.
So,
right. So is that where the line is drawn?
yeah, I think when you're trying to imitate, I think you reference it, the scored stucco, imitation brick, stone, I think covers that category you're talking about, which is you're trying to make it look like something else.
Yeah.
So is that enough of a limitation on the EFIS and EFIS-like products that the foam-based products comes out?
Yeah, I'd be inclined to take it out. It's because I don't know. I think it's a slippery slope, and I could see somebody getting rejected, even though there's nothing about the application that's any different from an appearance standpoint. I don't know if somebody wants to put EFIS on the first floor in a flat wall kind of condition. There's certainly some risk that it's not as durable. Somebody might punch a hole in the finish, but that's not really an ARB issue in my mind. That's a durability question.
Yeah.
I think some of what we, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I understand what you're saying, Frank. Some of what we are thinking about is long-term aesthetic and maintenance of a standard of quality. So if, to your point, if this looks good day one and in a year it looks awful, I think that would be something we would want to consider under the heading of quality of building materials to maintain that aesthetic.
I think that
durability is definitely or should be a factor.
Yeah, I think those issues are some of the points that that we were thinking about when we were first putting this list together. And I think when this becomes form-based code for the RIO 29 area, it's not entrance corridor guidelines. It's form-based code for the RIO 29 area. So,
right.
and that I think that plays into the whole issue of what is the character of the area and the long-term aesthetics and high quality design is part of the consideration.
Yeah, I think support leaving stucco as a limited material for that reason, just because it often, it can certainly be done in ways that aren't blank and scaleless, but it's a material that more easily lends itself to that.
So to Margaret's question, I wonder if, Margaret, were you suggesting we take out the foam-based products category and leave the scored stucco imitation brick / stone category in? And you asked if it would cover that?
I was thinking that that's where your conversation was going, but I really feel like they should both stay in.
Maybe if you just say foam-based products including EFIS trim, you kind of, I think, address that. I would argue that their EFIS, when properly installed, is very durable, and there are a number of applications around town that are 25, 30 years old, still look great. Again, I don't think you could tell. You couldn't drive by an EFS building and necessarily know it was EFS. Unless it has EFS trim, which is pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was a good point, Chris, you made, that's where it starts to look cheap.
Do you think, Frank, that's covered by allowing it in limited amounts or special circumstances? Does that cover trim? That's allowed in those situations? Or you're saying not trim? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm certainly trim.
Yeah.
I think limited to areas that are, high enough that you can't tell, or that, I'm just trying to make sure that the finish itself doesn't become a problem, because I don't think that's the issue.
So is there consensus? On the EFS issue?
So the issue sounds to me like it's foam based, right? Is that what I'm hearing? So
I think if you just inserted foam-based trim products,
Yeah.
that maybe that takes care of it.
So the foam-based nature of it is only an issue for trim. Is that accurate?
That would be my contention.
In my opinion, yeah.
Yeah.
It's 2. Does everyone else agree?
So we're allowing foam-based stucco on the ground floor at street level is what we're saying if we agreed to just put the word trim in there, right?
Yeah.
Have we done that in the past? Have we allowed that in areas that were close to the entrance corridor? I just don't remember. I just remember the brick up at Hollymead.
I mean, if we're allowing stucco,
yeah,
and the appearance is indistinguishable, then the only issue is the foam-based nature of the backboard, and whether that is an architectural issue, a durability issue. Certainly, if you hit the wall with your hand or something, you know it's not a cementatious true stucco. I just don't know how far we should go as an ARB to prohibit that. I mean, it's not used a lot anymore anyway, because I think people are scared of it. But
We just had a few weeks back a request for a hotel to change the material to a foam-based stucco.
For all the exterior.
For
right.
a lot of it.
I think I would agree with the discussion that to the extent we're allowing cementitious stucco, we could allow elastomeric stucco to the same extent. Can you remind me, Margaret, does this propose that stucco is allowable as a primary building material?
In the
or is it?
It appears to.
In the list right now, we have foam-based products, including EFS, styrofoam, and other face-sealed foam products, only allowed on non-principal faces or for architectural detail above the first floor. And then scored stucco, meaning imitation brick or stone, is prohibited.
Okay.
But regular
I think
stucco is
I-
allowed as a primary building material, to answer your question.
Right.
I think, I mean, that's what it appears, item 3 is stucco, and there's no limitation on it.
Right.
I don't know what to tell you. I mean, this has also come into play for signs. We've had sign materials and, the weed eaters around the signs just destroy that foam backed material at the bottom, and the sign after a year of summer, and lawn care looks awful. So I think, that's why we've always had like brick or stone at the ground plane. I think you could probably get into a lot of little details here with this.
Right. I guess I would offer, yeah, I support the language as written for the EFS and would even support moving stucco to a similar limitation so that it wasn't primary. But if as a compromise, would suggest we go with the language as is.
I agree with Dade. I'm fine keeping stucco as primary, but I think the EFS as written works.
Well, maybe under stucco, what if you just added cementatious or elastomeric finish? Because that would allow somebody.
Yeah. That makes sense, Frank.
So if you add elastomeric to the stucco entry, does that not confuse anything down below?
I don't think so.
I don't know enough about the material, sorry, to really give a good comment. Elastomeric's different than foam?
Yes.
Well, yes, elastomeric refers to a polymer modified stucco. So that it's, like a latex paint, it has a binder in it that's a plastic.
Yeah. Then I would support that.
Yeah, the color is integrated into the stucco finish.
Got it.
So yeah, the EFS, it's elastomeric, well, it's exterior insulation and finish system, nothing about elastomeric actually in that acronym. So it's really more about the foam.
I would support that then.
Okay.
Great. Any other comments on materials?
No.
Yeah.
All right. I'm looking at my cheat sheet here. I think, do we have anything else? Rachel, Leah, Michaela, anything else that we can answer for you?
We didn't have any further questions. We have one quick slide about next steps just for your awareness.
That's great. Thanks.
Do you mind sharing that slide?
Yeah, let me get it back up to full screen.
Thank you.
There we go.
Thanks, Leah. So this is just a closing slide to share that we are working on finalizing a draft that incorporates feedback from the Planning Commission, the board, and property owners, developers, and others that have weighed in on the draft so far. We'll also incorporate comments heard today. And then we will be putting a draft up on the county website and sharing information about how to access that, so folks can provide their comments to staff before public hearings. We have a public hearing scheduled with the Planning Commission for February 16th, and we anticipate having a subsequent board public hearing in March likely, though that will be dependent on that Planning Commission public hearing. And that is all we have for you all today. Thanks a lot for weighing in on both of those questions and just diving into a lot of detailed aspects of this code.
Thank you. Thanks all three of you. Really well done. We really very much appreciate it.
Thanks for all your work on this. This is a very ambitious project.
Indeed. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, thanks, guys.
All right, we will, how's everybody doing? Does anybody need a break? Keep rolling.
What do we have left?
We have two other business items. We've got, I think, Chris, your presentation on the entrance corridor.
Yep.
And approval of minutes.
Okay.
That's it, Frank.
Yeah, I got to jump off at 4. That's my only limitation.
Okay. Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, I'll try and keep this quick. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So this is a scenic drive down Route 240, which is a 4.5 mile stretch, which follows the old route of Route 250 from Mitchum's River through Crozet Historic District, where it turns south and rejoins Route 250 in Brownsville. So Dade set a really high bar for his presentation last week, which I will probably walk under that bar without having to even stoop down. So, but like he did, I kind of broke it up into zones. And these zones kind of represent almost a bell curve going from rural to urban as you get into downtown Crozet, back to rural. The first zone is pretty rural and has a very rural feel and appearance to it, which starts to get more developed with more single family development that in some cases has been there for a very long time. And then on the south side, more recent higher density residential development. Zone 3 is kind of an industrial area that is dominated by the old ConAgra complex, which now houses Music Today and Star Hill. Zone 4 is a kind of more transitional area. It's has some historic workforce type housing interspaced with a couple newer commercial structures. Zone 5 is the Crozet Historic District, which is very well documented. And then Zone 6 and Zone 7 is kind of moving back out into a more rural feel. Zone 6 is more kind of single family properties that look like they've been there for a while, whereas Zone 7 has some more recent development. This is the zoning map that shows 240, and you can kind of see that those zones reflected in the zoning. That this light blue area is the industrial. The purple is kind of the downtown Crozet area, and then these green areas on the fringes are residential zoning. This shows the extent of the Crozet Historic District. And the entrance corridor just occurs kind of in the lower right-hand corner of that. It extends down a little bit. So so this is the kind of the start from the eastern side. This is the 240, 250 intersection right next to the Mitchum's River. So this has been updated actually. I wish I had a photograph of what's there now, but this structure, since Google went through with their Google Streets camera, has changed. The parking lot is more improved, and the building has had some improvements as well. But once you pass that corner, it's quite rural. Coming through here, there are single family properties, but they're very well screened from the road. This is a single family home that's visible, but that black 4-board fence is kind of typical for this area and seems to be something that's used in the newer residential developments as kind of a screen or barrier. These are some homes that are on the north side of 240. They kind of show kind of homes that look like they've existed there for a while, and they tend to be, at least on the north side of 240, relatively modest in size, and the lots tend to be a little smaller there. This is also typical of the corridor. There's a lot of industrial development, and that kind of goes in with the history of Crozet as a kind of a transportation hub, and a lot of kind of unadorned industrial type sites, which we'll see more of. This is the county water treatment. I think it's a water treatment plant. On the other side of the road are these gorgeous ponds that they put in with the chain link fencing. This is getting into some of the newer development, which is more or less screened from the road with new plantings, I think. Whereas this is getting back on the north side, which is kind of more extant development, some larger plots and some smaller. This is some screening fence, whereas on the north side, which is the right side, you can see kind of a 3 and 4 board fencing. This is one of the entrances to development on the south side. Whereas this is a development that looks like modular homes on the north side across. Here's another residential development and another one. Once again, the fencing tends to be used in these newer developments just to, once again, this is something that's a home on the north side of the road. This is what appears to be an old gas station or store, which is on the south side. In between the larger developments, there look to be some smaller properties that have kind of a really wide variety of building styles, but it's still mostly residential. On the left, I'm not sure what this site is. It looks like something of an industrial nature was on this side. It's really just marked with kind of random utility type buildings and the fencing. So this, we're getting closer into Crozet and what I'm calling the industrial zone. This kind of just basic block building is kind of typical for what you see as you approach downtown Crozet. This is part of the old ConAgra, and it's kind of a 50s or 60s kind of modern industrial type look. Going through this area is really dominated by this complex as you come through. Once you get through it, there's some more kind of, I'll say, historic workforce housing on the opposite side of the tracks. But as you proceed along, the south side of 240 is dominated by the railroad tracks. And the right side is dominated by historic workforce housing. Here's the Crozet Fire Department. Once again, a very utilitarian type building. This is a newer development that is kind of well screened, and it kind of stands out for being newer and well screened. This is the shopping center as you're approaching downtown Crozet. Once again, it's kind of, not sure what style you would call this, but it's, once again, the railroad tracks kind of dominate the left side through this whole area. Some more kind of utility type buildings, the car wash, that storefront. Here's the old Crozet Depot, which is a very nice example. And some of these other buildings, the building next to Crozet Pizza, the Crozet Pizza building, we're now getting into structures that are contributing structures to the historic district, which in some cases, the historic district is really eclectic. There's, if you read the documents for it, the range of styles go from Queen Anne, Colonial Revival, Italianate, but there's a lot of like vernacular and just kind of industrial architecture that, some of which has been burnished by the passage of time and some not, and still looks a little bit raw. This is a close-up. This building is quite old and was used as a storage area for the depot. This is the underpass, and this is where Route 240 turns south. Kind of beyond the tracks, you can see what's now an old folks home, but was constructed as a cold storage facility in 1912. So there's a close-up of that. Here's some of the retail type areas. Once again, many of these buildings are contributing structures, and what they call a period of significance for the historic district is from 1815, when the oldest structure was built, going to 1955, which is a really broad, so it's not just a broad range of styles, but it's a really broad time period too, in terms of period of significance. These are just some of the structures from downtown Crozet, and it being a historic area, and a lot of, there's a lot of discussion beyond this about downtown Crozet, but I'd say that Crozet is so dominant in kind of the overall nature of 240 as an entrance corridor. It really kind of, I think any cues that are taken about the nature of 240 as a whole really kind of come from Crozet. So a gas station. So this is where you start coming out of downtown Crozet, and it starts becoming more residential, less dense, this would be a typical house through here, kind of set back from the road, much further than the workforce type housing on the other side of town. You can see very well screened, and you start getting more of a natural buffer along the road. That's the graveyard on the, I guess it would be on the western side. And then this is a single family home on the opposite side. Once again, this is also out of date. This has been much more built up too. So we're not getting to the zone that's much closer to Brownsville. And once again is kind of zoned for more residential development, not single family, but like, you know, full on development. So like, you know, if you were to drive by here today, the area right behind that fence is all filled in with housing as well. But then it continues back into a little bit more of a rural feel until you get to the end, which is the end intersection back with Route 250 again. On the left in this photo, and what you can see from here, is at the very, very tip at that 240, 250 intersection, there's just one little highway commercial kind of node at the end that I think just encompasses this one property. So in conclusion, I really was scratching my head in terms of like, what is the overall theme of Route 240? Like, what's the takeaway? And really, I think there is no overarching theme, and I think that is the theme. It's so eclectic as you drive down that to me is the character of 240, is like anything goes. Like, you pass so many different building types and eras that there's, I think, opportunity for a wide variety of, you know, looking forward. New development could take many forms and fit in to this corridor in a way that it might not in a corridor that's already more consistent in and of itself. So I guess that's kind of my conclusion, but I figure we could just kind of open it up for discussion. I can go back to any particular slide if anybody wants to see anything in more detail.
Thanks, Chris. That was great. Clearly the bars are at least, you know, level at best. There's no water or anything, brother. Frank, I know we're going to lose you in about 5 minutes. Any comments, Frank?
No, I mean, I much like Chris, you know, we've deliberated over this question for 4 or 5 years now. In our own work, just figuring out what the essential character of the area is and how do you capture that in you know, any future development, and how do you you know, there have to be some guardrails, but to Chris's point, the area is so eclectic. It is unique in its level of diversity and just kind of anything goes architecture. In some ways, that's kind of liberating, I think, for those of us who are contemplating additional development there someday.
Yeah, I think once I got my mind around it, it felt a little bit liberating to me. So that was kind of my feeling about it.
You know, I think it's still, it's agricultural and industrial. Really, that's where its roots are. And so I think that's probably, if we were going to pick two themes, I think those would probably be the ones I would choose to maybe focus on from an architectural standpoint. But otherwise, yeah, great presentation.
Thanks.
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, those are good. Those are great comments. Frank Hancock?
Thanks, Chris. I think what struck me, and every time I drive that, is that the industrial that's out there that to draw from, I think is really, I think will be helpful in the precedent, and how this document is used, that you've got that, the Music Today complex, the water treatment, the kind of municipal industrial piece. And then my other just two quick points, I think the borrowed landscape or extended landscape, I think is really important in sections of this corridor, similar to Dade's presentation, where you've got a lot of mountain views, and then you've got a lot of, kind of rolling agriculture that I think we want to protect. And then somehow, I think Frank Stoner summed it up, agricultural and industrial. And I think the agricultural has a lot to do with kind of the view beyond the corridor. And then lastly, I think this format was great. Thanks, Dade. I like how you broke it down and you were challenged with like, well, what's a title for each box? And I think that's a good way to do it. So thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Frank. Dade, any comments?
No, thank you very much. I regret I lost the video feed of the screen, so I look forward, Chris, to seeing the visuals when you have a chance to post the verbal description. I was in my mind's eye traveling with you, so I appreciated very much the analysis. Really, really thoughtful description. I think, yeah, I agree with what you and Frank have said about the eclecticism and how potentially liberating that is. I don't know whether in the bell curve you saw there's any zoning or gradation of that, or if it really, at the end feels so all over the map that anything goes anywhere along it, or whether there maybe are zones that there's one, to Frank Hancock's point, there's an agricultural landscape and viewshed that's an important hyphen. I don't know how detailed we ultimately can get in our recommendations, but just identifying those character defining elements that maybe would restrict a little bit of that anything goes to hold on to some of those essential parts of the character.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely a gradient from rural to urban.
Thanks, guys. I got to jump off.
Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.
Kept interrupting you. I apologize. So the only comments I would add, in addition to what you all have talked about, and Frank Stoner, obviously, and probably others of you know way more about Crozet and the planning out there than I do. The one thing, Chris, that was really helpful was that you broke out the zones, right, and described those. It still feels like there's kind of a downtown Crozet piece. So, whether it's some of the commercial that you showed, the Mud House, or some other, the library, I mean, that sort of feels like a downtown section. So maybe that's something that has a certain characteristic or style. And then you've got kind of the peripheries that are part of that bell curve you talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you. So any other comments on this stretch? All right. What do we know what we're doing for the next meeting and who's up? I honestly don't have the chart in front of me. I'm not sure. Margaret, do you know?
It looks like the next one on the list is Frank Stoner with Route 151.
And that's in keeping with our plan to look at the west, right?
Actually,
Okay.
well, yes, it would be. That is next on the list. That was originally meant to be for today's date as well, but I think we'll be adjusting that as we go.
Okay. Will you send him a note just reminding?
I will. Mhm.
Awesome. I think the only other piece of business is for us to approve or adopt the January 4th, 2021 ARB meetings. Minutes.
So moved.
I'll move for approval.
Great, second. And Carolyn, vote, please.
All right, Mr. Stoner, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Henningsen,
Aye.
Mr. Vanderwerf,
Aye.
Mr. Missile.
Aye. Thank you.
And I'm sorry,
next-
who seconded that one?
Oh, I did.
Thank you.
Great, and I think the next meeting is on February 1st. Do we know, does everybody think they'll be here?
Yes.
Great,
Yeah, I think so.
awesome.
Thank you.
All right, I think that is it. Anything else, Margaret?
No, that's everything I've got. Thank you all.
All right. Chris and Margaret, thank you very much. Good to see everybody.
Nice to see you all.
Thanks,
All
Carol.
right, you too. Have a good
Thanks,
2 weeks.
Fred.
Bye,
Thanks.
everybody.